Hello again and welcome to Pick Yourself, the podcast that helps you build a meaningful electronic music career. If your goal is to create and release outstanding music on respected labels, get better bookings and grow a tribe of true fans instead of just social followers, then this show is for you. My name is Philip, thanks for tuning in, and now let's get right into today's episode. Welcome to episode 45 of Pick Yourself. I'm super happy to have you here with me again. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining the show. And if you're new to this, make sure to subscribe because you don't want to miss out on the upcoming episodes. We have a lot of great stuff coming up. And in this week's episode, we are talking about the so-called Impostor Syndrome. This is something that a lot of upcoming artists, but also a lot of very successful people struggle with and have to deal with, because otherwise you are self-sabotaging your music career, and that would be a shame. So I will try to help you with this. And if you think that this is not a problem for you, then I encourage you to listen to this episode and find out if that's really true, because a lot of people suffer from imposter syndrome without actually knowing what it is and what the consequences are. Now, before we jump into the discussion itself, let me quickly point you to the resource that goes with this podcast. It's called The 7 Strategies of Highly Successful Electronic Music Artists, and that is a free PDF that you can get at pickyourselfpodcast.com/free. And in this free guide, I am sharing with you the things that have worked for my most successful studio clients. So this is real-world stuff that has worked for people that I deal with on a daily and weekly basis. And you can implement this right away for your own artist career. It really makes a difference. It takes you like 5 minutes to read, but it can dramatically change the outcome of what you're trying to achieve there. So head over to pickyourselfpodcast.com/free and get this free guide. Okay, let's now talk about the imposter syndrome, which is the topic of this week's episode. So first of all, let me ask you a couple of questions. Have you ever felt like a fraud? Have you ever doubted that you deserve to be successful? Do you sometimes fear that others might find out that you're just a big imposter? And what if you aren't all that talented and hardworking? Maybe you just got lucky. So if any of these thoughts sound familiar, then you might be battling with an issue that is very common among musicians, but also many other types of creative people, of artists, of painters, of writers. And that is the imposter syndrome. Okay, but what exactly does imposter syndrome mean? I have found a definition that I think hits the nail on the head. So let me quickly read this for you. I found it on themuse.com. So here we go. This psychological phenomenon, known as imposter syndrome, reflects a belief that you're an inadequate and incompetent failure, despite evidence that indicates you're skilled and quite successful. And so just to make this clear, this is different from just a lack of confidence. Imposter syndrome is way worse than just a lack of confidence. You're truly doubting to deserve your success, even if there's more than enough evidence that proves the opposite. And in consequence, this means that overcoming imposter syndrome is a bit more tricky than just battling with normal confidence issues. Now, I think we also should talk about why this is such a common problem among artists. And of course, the imposter syndrome can be found in almost every area of life and also all across society. But it is especially problematic for music producers, DJs, and other artists and creatives in general. And Dr. Valerie Young, who is an expert in this field, says the following on this. The nature of creative work makes everyone more vulnerable to feeling inadequate, and even more so if you are not classically trained. Now, what does she mean by that? Creative work is different from all other types of work, definitely, because there is so much subjectivity involved. It's hard to objectively tell if a song is good or not, for example. It's really hard to objectively tell if your production is on point or not. I mean, of course, there are certain parameters that help you judge this, but overall, this is definitely a lot of guesswork and subjective opinions. Well, of course, you are questioning yourself more than, for example, an engineer that just calculated with the wrong formula, for example. Yeah, of course, it's easy to prove that you haven't done a good job. But with creative work, it's definitely different. Now let's talk about the second part of this quote. She says that you feel even more inadequate if you are not classically trained. Well, I assume that only a very small percentage of electronic music producers qualify as classically trained. But why is that such a big difference? This classical training at least gives you some qualification, I would say, something that proves to yourself, okay, maybe I am really able and good enough because somebody has certified me with whatever degree you got. But in the end, this is definitely not what makes the difference, because so many great songs and EPs and albums have been produced by people who are complete autodidacts, who haven't studied anything professionally, so there's no classical training involved, and that's perfectly fine. And I think this is very problematic, because if the majority of electronic music producers doesn't have any type of classical training or degree or whatsoever, then it means they are more likely to suffer from imposter syndrome. And to be honest, this reflects exactly what I'm hearing every single week from my coaching clients. Many of them are insecure about their decisions because they feel that they haven't earned the right to go with their gut feeling, for example. But that's really important in music production. You need to trust your ears and you need to trust your taste to make decisions quickly, move on, do things intuitively, and in the end, create something that is natural, that isn't coming from overthinking things. So in essence, overcoming imposter syndrome as an artist is a crucial step towards a healthy mindset that supports your ambitions rather than sabotaging them. Okay, so let's talk about solutions now. How can you deal with imposter syndrome as an artist? By now, you should have a good idea of what imposter syndrome is and why it's especially problematic for artists. And I'm going to share with you 3 steps that help you deal with imposter syndrome. And keep in mind, please, that this is something pretty powerful. And many artists are fighting a lifelong battle, basically, to combat imposter syndrome. So this is not something that goes away just by listening to this episode. You actually have to implement these things again and again and again. So this is really important here. Okay, the first step you need to take is share your struggle with other artists. And this is super important. We don't talk about this stuff. We don't talk about things like this in the electronic music community, and that is a big problem, I think. Overcoming imposter syndrome as an artist is only possible if you're ready to open up and share your feelings with other creatives. And I promise you, they will most likely feel the same way. So I think it would be great if we all take this a bit more seriously and start opening up. And there are many advantages that come with speaking about imposter syndrome with other artists. First of all, it helps take off some of the pressure. Imagine how great it would feel to hear from someone just like you that they are fighting the same battle as you. And then getting someone else's objective opinion helps you readjust your perspective. That's also pretty good. If you suffer from imposter syndrome, you are likely to have a very skewed view on your achievements and also your problems and failures. And other music producers can help you see clearly again. So this external perspective is very, very helpful. And by the way, if you haven't already, make sure to join our Facebook community. We have a private Facebook community of podcast listeners. It's awesome people that help each other, that support each other, that share these things with each other. You can go to pickyourselfpodcast.com/community and it will take you there. And I really highly recommend you go there because there's a lot of great advice going on. I'm also there. I'm also helping the people inside this group. So make sure to join. And now there is one other thing that I found to be very effective when it comes to battling imposter syndrome as an artist. And that is Mastermind Groups. So this term might sound a bit strange, but what it essentially means is you meet up regularly with a small group of people that are doing exactly what you do and are more or less at your level of competence. That's really important. And it works a little bit like a self-help group in the most positive way. You encourage each other, you share your struggles, and you work at becoming the best version of yourselves. There's one more thing that's really important with Mastermind Groups. The people in this group need to have a growth mindset and must be genuinely interested in seeing you succeed. So they are true collaborators. They are very eager to learn and very open to new things and also open to criticism. So these kinds of character traits are things that you want to look for when you put together a mastermind group. And just as an example, I also am part of a mastermind group. We meet up every other week. It's people that are more or less at my level. It's also people from the professional music industry, so they are mixing and mastering engineers. And we meet up every other week. We discuss things that we have experienced, and we help each other when things get tough. And I have taken so much positivity from these meetings. I have taken so much knowledge from these meetings. It's just incredible. These people also are pretty close friends now. And I can just encourage you to try this out. This is one of the most powerful things that I have done in my whole music career. Okay, let's now move to step number 2, and that is start a daily success journal. So overcoming imposter syndrome as an artist becomes much easier if you start celebrating the small and big wins every day. And if you keep a daily success journal, you will notice more and more that you truly deserve to have success. And ultimately, this helps you separate feelings from facts, and that is super important. You start to see daily evidence of the work you've put in and the rewards that you gain from it. And this exercise also helps you practice kindness towards yourself, which is also an important step in the process. And now, earlier on in the podcast, we had an episode on success habits. And this could be a good starting point for your daily success journal. So you just see whether you stick to your habits or not, and you jot down, today I managed to stick to this habit, and this habit. And even if this is something super simple and something super small, it's still evidence that you build up momentum. These success habits create a compound effect that will pay off massive dividends later on in your artist career. And just by writing down that you managed to stick to your habits, you have created a small daily proof that you deserve to be successful. And then you can move on to also bigger things. So for example, if you have put in the work, if you have done the research, for example, to find the right label, and then later on, eventually you land a release on that label, of course you can prove to yourself, yes, I really did the work myself. I am talented enough. I am also hardworking enough. I deserve to be successful. So you just have no excuse to feel like a fraud anymore. And this is a pretty powerful exercise to combat imposter syndrome. And now there's one more thing that's super important here. You have to accept that failure is a natural ingredient of growth. You have to develop a new response to failure and mistake making. That is super important. And this is also one of the things that Dr. Valerie Young, this imposter syndrome expert, recommends. So instead of beating yourself up because something just hasn't worked out as you planned, you have to accept that failure and the learning from it is essential to growth, to massive growth. And it's no wonder that people who struggle with perfectionism also suffer a lot from imposter syndrome, because if you always strive for perfection, of course, you feel like a failure if you don't quite make it to there. All right, my third point here is learn to accept compliments. So most people can't say thank you when they receive a compliment. And isn't that strange? Even if it's a clearly honest one. And instead we look for excuses and we say stupid things like, oh, well, I guess I was just lucky in that regard. Well, that's not true. In most cases, you actually deserve that compliment. And if you want to overcome imposter syndrome as an artist, you need to build that mental muscle of, I truly deserve this. And I believe that accepting compliments wholeheartedly is one of the easiest exercises you can do, but I think it has a massive effect. And part of this is you have to own your accomplishments. And what do I mean by that? Being proud of what you've achieved can be more difficult than you think. We often ascribe our success to luck or to help from others rather than talent or practice or the hard work we've put in. And if you want to combat imposter syndrome as an artist, you need to own your accomplishments and accept the fact that you've truly earned your success. Okay, so here is my overall conclusion on this. I believe that overcoming imposter syndrome as an artist is one of the most important mindset shifts you need to adopt to take your music career to the next level, because not only will this help you unlock your true potential, it also liberates you from these nagging thoughts in the back of your head. And believe me, you're most likely not a fraud, even if you think you are. And instead, you deserve to be proud of your accomplishments, no matter how small or how big they are, because building a meaningful artist career is a long process, and only those who dare to adopt the right mindset will succeed in the long run. So, if you set realistic goals, if you implement the right work ethic, if you collaborate with the right people in the scene, then you're going to achieve quite a lot. Not because you were lucky, but because you have implemented the necessary steps. It's a little bit like a puzzle, and if you find the right pieces, if you put them together, then there's just no reason why you shouldn't succeed. And now some of you might say, well, but a little bit of luck is always necessary. But yeah, honestly, do you think that in 10 years of doing this, in 10 years of building and growing a meaningful music career, you will not have a few lucky moments? Come on, you will definitely have some of them. And I have read something that I find quite inspiring, and that is, luck is just the moment when opportunity and preparation collide. And I think this is so true. So you can do a lot to make luck happen. Okay, let's put this into action now. How can you deal with imposter syndrome as an artist? You should already have a pretty good overview by now, but I want to give you 3 action steps that you can implement right away. The first one is acknowledge that this issue is very common among creative people. I just think it helps a lot to know that you're not alone with these thoughts. Most of your artist peers suffer from the same feeling, and it's time to start talking about this more than ever before. And even some of the most successful music producers and DJs suffer from imposter syndrome. So yes, you can be super successful, but still feel like an imposter, still feel like a fraud. And taking this issue seriously is the first step to an important mindset shift in your music career that just makes it more healthy overall. Then action step number 2, start to observe your own thought patterns. So I just encourage you to listen to your negative self-talk and then take a step back and observe it. Does it remind you of the things I've described in this episode? How realistic are these thoughts? Are you really kind enough with yourself? And when in doubt, then talk to someone you trust who knows you well. This person will most likely be able to put you back on track and tell you that you deserve to be proud of yourself. So this also helps readjust a little bit the perspective. And action step number 3 is start to react differently. So as soon as you start to become aware of imposter syndrome, you have the chance to react differently. Instead of continuing with the negative self-talk, you can then look for evidence that you truly deserve to be successful. And if you follow my suggestion and keep a daily success journal, you will have more than enough proof of what you've put into your artist career. And this can help massively if you need to regain clarity. Okay, that's it for this week's episode. Now I'm super curious to hear from you. Do you sometimes have these thoughts? What has helped you so far? You can leave a comment on the blog post for this episode. Just go to pickyourselfpodcast.com. There's a deep blog post for every single episode. But you can also go to our Facebook community, pickyourselfpodcast.com/community, and just join the discussion there because we have a dedicated discussion thread for every single episode. Now, if you haven't already, make sure to download the 7 strategies of highly successful electronic music artists. I really believe that this resource makes a massive difference. Go to pickyourselfpodcast.com/free, and I hope to see you again next week. If you don't want to miss any of the upcoming episodes, please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And you can find detailed blog posts for every single episode on pickyourselfpodcast.com. Until then, see you next time.